Captain Lisa Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched the green planet spin below them like a marble covered in thick clouds and endless forests. The ship had been traveling for 8 months to reach this distant world that the scientists back on Earth called Kepler 4042c, but everyone on the crew just called it green because of how it looked from space. Lisa had commanded 3 deep space missions before this one, but none had taken her crew this far from home, or to a world that showed such clear signs of complex life. Commander Jake Sullivan walked up beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. That was still warm despite coming from the machine that had been acting up for the past 2 weeks. Jake was her second in command and had been with her on the last mission to the moons of Jupiter, where they had found those strange ice formations that might have been made by some kind of life, but turned out to be just natural crystals that grew in weird patterns when exposed to radiation. "The scans are showing some interesting readings down there, Captain," Jake said as he looked out at the planet through the main viewing window that stretched across the front of the bridge. "Dr. Foster thinks we might be looking at something really big moving through those trees." Lisa took a sip of her coffee and made a face because it tasted like it had been sitting in the machine for too long, but she drank it anyway because caffeine was caffeine, and they were still 3 days away from their scheduled rest period. She had been reviewing the preliminary reports from their long-range sensors for the past hour, and the data was unlike anything she had seen before in her 15 years of space exploration. Dr. Amy Foster was the ship's xenobiologist and the smartest person Lisa had ever worked with when it came to understanding alien life forms. Amy had discovered the microorganisms on Mars that proved life could exist in the harsh conditions of that red planet, and she had been the first person to successfully communicate with the intelligent dolphins on Europa using a complex system of sound patterns and light signals. "How big are we talking about, Dr. Foster?" Lisa asked as she turned to face the small woman who was hunched over a computer terminal that was displaying streams of data in green and blue lines that moved across the screen like a heartbeat monitor. Amy looked up from her work and pushed her glasses up her nose before answering. "The readings suggest we are looking at creatures that could be the size of blue whales, Captain, but they are moving through the trees like they weigh nothing at all. The infrared shows massive heat signatures that appear and disappear in patterns. That suggests intelligence rather than random animal movement." Sergeant Tony Blake was standing near the weapons console even though there was no immediate threat that anyone could see. Tony was the kind of Marine who believed in being ready for anything, and he had served on enough missions to know that first contact situations could go from peaceful to dangerous in a matter of seconds. He was tall and broad-shouldered with scars on his hands from the training exercises he did every morning in the ship's small gym. "Captain, with all due respect, these readings could be wrong," Tony said as he checked the display that showed the ship's defensive systems were all online and ready. "We have never seen anything like this before, and it might be better to observe from orbit for a longer period before we commit to going down there." Lisa understood Tony's concerns because keeping her crew safe was her primary responsibility, but she also knew that opportunities like this one did not come along very often in a person's career. The mission briefing back on Earth had been clear about their objectives, which were to explore potentially habitable worlds and to make contact with any intelligent life they might encounter while following all the protocols that had been developed by the best minds in the space program. Kelly Moore was the ship's communications specialist, and she had been monitoring all frequencies for any signs of artificial signals since they had arrived in orbit around the planet 3 days ago. Kelly was young and enthusiastic about her work, and she had volunteered for this mission, even though it meant being away from Earth for almost 2 years, including the travel time to get here and back. I am not picking up any radio signals or electromagnetic transmissions that would indicate advanced technology, Captain," Kelly reported from her station near the back of the bridge. "But that does not mean these creatures are not intelligent because they might communicate in ways we have not thought of yet." Lisa walked over to the large display screen that showed a detailed map of the planet's surface, with areas marked in different colors to indicate vegetation density and topographical features. The forests covered most of the land masses, and the trees appeared to be much larger than anything found on Earth, with some of them reaching heights of over 300 feet, according to the orbital surveys. The planet had 2 small moons that created complex tidal patterns in the vast oceans that covered about 60% of the surface. The atmosphere was rich in oxygen and nitrogen, with trace amounts of other gases that made it breathable for humans without the need for environmental suits, though the protocols still required them to wear protective gear during any surface operations. "Dr. Foster, what kind of timeline are we looking at if we want to establish a research camp on the surface?" Lisa asked as she studied the topographical data that showed several large clearings that could serve as landing sites for their shuttle. Amy pulled up a new set of displays that showed weather patterns and radiation levels across different regions of the planet. "We could have a basic camp operational within 48 hours, Captain. The environmental conditions are well within acceptable parameters for human habitation, and the soil samples we can gather remotely show no signs of harmful microorganisms or toxic compounds." Lisa made her decision based on the information available and her own instincts that had served her well throughout her career in space exploration. The creatures moving through the forests below represented a chance to make the kind of discovery that only happened once in a generation, and she was not going to let fear or excessive caution prevent her crew from pursuing that opportunity. "Prepare the shuttle for departure in 6 hours," she announced to her crew. "Landing party will consist of myself, Dr. Foster, Sergeant Blake, and communications specialist Moore. Commander Sullivan, you will maintain orbital position and monitor our communications at all times." Jake nodded his understanding of the orders, even though Lisa could see in his expression that he wished he was going with them instead of staying behind to watch over the ship. But someone had to remain in command of the Liberty, and Jake was the only person she trusted completely to make the right decisions if something went wrong on the surface. The next few hours passed quickly as the landing party made their preparations for what could be humanity's first contact with truly alien intelligence. The shuttle landed in a clearing surrounded by trees that stretched up into the sky like living towers made of bark and leaves that rustled in the gentle breeze that carried strange but pleasant smells from the deep forest. Lisa felt her boots touch the alien soil for the first time and took a deep breath of air that tasted clean and fresh, despite being filtered through her protective suit, which the protocols required, even though the atmosphere readings showed it was safe for humans to breathe. Dr. Amy Foster immediately began setting up her equipment, while Sergeant Tony Blake established a perimeter around their landing site and checked for any signs of immediate danger. Kelly Moore activated the communications array that would keep them in contact with Commander Jake Sullivan, who was monitoring their mission from orbit aboard the UES Liberty. The trees around them were unlike anything found on Earth, with trunks that were easily 50 feet across, and bark that had a strange metallic sheen that seemed to shift colors depending on how the light hit it. The leaves were enormous and shaped like hands with 7 fingers each, and they moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate rather than random responses to the wind. "Captain, these readings are incredible," Amy said as she watched data flow across her portable scanner. "The biodiversity here is off the charts, and I am detecting complex chemical signatures that suggest these plants might be communicating with each other through airborne compounds." Tony was scanning the forest with his rifle ready, but not aimed at anything specific because there was no visible threat. But his training had taught him that the biggest dangers were often the ones you could not see until it was too late. The motion sensors he had placed around their camp were showing normal background activity that consisted mainly of small creatures moving through the underbrush and birds, or flying animals moving through the canopy high above their heads. Kelly had successfully established contact with the ship and was monitoring multiple frequencies for any signs of artificial signals, while also recording everything they encountered for later analysis by the scientific teams back on Earth. The equipment they carried represented the most advanced technology humanity had developed for exploration and first contact situations. Lisa walked to the edge of the clearing and looked up at the massive trees that formed a natural cathedral around them, with shafts of sunlight filtering down through the leaves in patterns that created an almost magical atmosphere. The planet's sun was slightly larger than Earth's sun, but farther away, which created a golden quality to the light that made everything look like it was part of an ancient fairy tale. On their second-day planet side, the motion sensors began detecting something large moving through the forest in their direction, but whatever it was seemed to be approaching slowly and deliberately rather than charging toward them like a predator hunting prey. Amy's equipment showed a massive heat signature that was unlike anything in their databases, and the electromagnetic reading suggested they were dealing with a creature that had some kind of natural electrical system. "Captain, we have contact," Tony reported as he watched his instruments show something huge moving between the trees about 200 meters from their position. "Whatever it is, it knows we are here, and it is being very careful about how it approaches us." Lisa felt her heart rate increase as she realized they were about to encounter something that could change humanity's understanding of life in the universe. The protocols for first contact were clear about maintaining calm and showing no aggressive behavior, while also being ready to defend themselves if the situation turned dangerous. Amy was recording everything with multiple cameras and sensors that would capture data across the entire electromagnetic spectrum so that scientists back on Earth would be able to study every detail of this historic moment. Kelly was maintaining constant communication with the ship, while also preparing to broadcast the first contact protocols in case they were dealing with a species that used radio waves for communication. The forest around them fell completely silent, as if every living thing was holding its breath and waiting to see what would happen next. Even the wind seemed to stop moving the leaves, and the only sound was the quiet hum of their electronic equipment and the beating of their own hearts. Then it emerged from between the trees like something from a dream or nightmare, depending on your point of view. The creature stood 30 feet tall on 6 limbs that served as both arms and legs, and moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. Its body was covered in what looked like natural armor plating that shifted colors from deep green to metallic blue, depending on how it moved. The head was enormous and clearly designed for intelligence, with large eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the human camp and the strange beings who had invaded its territory. When it looked directly at Lisa, she felt as if she was being examined by a scientist who was trying to determine exactly what kind of specimen she represented. "My God," Amy whispered as she watched the creature through her binoculars. "Look at the way it moves and the deliberate nature of its actions. This is definitely intelligent life, and it is studying us just as much as we are studying it," Tony kept his weapon ready, but followed Lisa's orders not to aim it directly at the creature unless it showed clear signs of aggression. The being seemed to understand that the small devices the humans carried were weapons because it kept a careful distance while continuing to observe their behavior and equipment. The creature began making sounds that were too low for human ears to hear properly, but Kelly's equipment picked up complex patterns in the vibrations that suggested some kind of language or communication system. Amy's scanners showed that the creature's armor plating was changing colors and patterns that corresponded to the sounds it was making. "Captain, I think it is trying to communicate with us," Kelly reported as she adjusted her equipment to better analyze the signals they were receiving. "The patterns are too complex and deliberate to be random noise." Lisa made the decision that would define the rest of the mission and possibly the future of human expansion into space. Against all her training and the protests of Sergeant Blake, she walked slowly toward the massive creature with her hands visible and empty to show that she meant no harm. The being watched her approach with what could only be described as curiosity, and when she got within 20 feet of its position, it leaned down to examine her more closely. Its head was easily 3 times the size of her entire body, but there was something in its eyes that suggested intelligence and possibly even compassion. Lisa felt as if she was standing before a mountain that had decided to come to life and take a closer look at the tiny creatures that had appeared in its domain. The creature's breath was warm and smelled like flowers mixed with something metallic. And when it reached out with one massive appendage, she held perfectly still while it gently touched her helmet with what could only be described as scientific curiosity. "First contact established," she said quietly into her radio, knowing that these words would be recorded and studied by historians for generations to come. "The subject appears to be intelligent and peaceful. Proceeding with communication protocols." The creature that Lisa had been communicating with for the past hour suddenly stepped back and turned its massive head toward the forest, as if it had heard something that the humans could not detect. Dr. Amy Foster noticed the change in behavior immediately and began scanning with her equipment for whatever had caught the being's attention, while Sergeant Tony Blake moved closer to Captain Martinez with his weapon ready. The forest around them began to vibrate with low-frequency sounds that Kelly Moore's equipment picked up as complex communication patterns between multiple large creatures that were approaching their location from different directions. The creature they had designated as Alpha raised itself to its full height and began producing sounds and light patterns that seemed to be some kind of response or acknowledgement to the messages it was receiving. "Captain, we have multiple contacts moving toward us through the trees," Tony reported as his motion sensors showed at least 6 massive heat signatures converging on their position. "These things are coordinating their movements, and they will have us surrounded in less than 5 minutes. Lisa felt a mixture of excitement and fear as she realized they were about to witness something that no human had ever seen before, which was a gathering of intelligent alien beings who were clearly coming to investigate the strange visitors who had appeared in their territory. The protocols for this situation were limited because no one back on Earth had imagined they would encounter organized group behavior so quickly after first contact. Amy was recording everything while analyzing the communication patterns between Alpha and the approaching creatures. Her equipment showed that the signals were becoming more complex and frequent, as if the beings were engaged in some kind of debate or discussion about what to do with the humans who had invaded their space. The first of the newcomers emerged from the trees on the far side of the clearing, and it was immediately obvious that this creature was larger and older than Alpha, with scars across its armor plating that spoke of many battles or encounters with dangerous situations. The way it moved suggested authority and confidence that came from being at the top of whatever social structure these beings had developed. "That one is definitely the leader," Amy whispered as she watched the massive creature survey the human camp with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Look at how Alpha is positioning itself in relation to the newcomer. There is clearly a hierarchy here, And we just met someone very important. Lisa designated the newcomer as Titan because of its size and obvious leadership position among the group of beings that continued to emerge from the forest around them. Each new arrival was unique in its markings and size, but all of them shared the same basic body structure and the same intelligent way of moving that suggested they were dealing with a species that had developed complex social behaviors. Titan approached Alpha, and the two massive creatures began an exchange of sounds and light patterns that was clearly some kind of conversation about the humans and what should be done with them. Lisa could see that Alpha was defending its decision to make peaceful contact, while Titan seemed to be questioning whether these small aliens represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. The other creatures formed a loose circle around the clearing, but they maintained a respectful distance from both the humans and the two leaders, who were engaged in what appeared to be a diplomatic discussion about first contact protocols from the alien perspective. Tony counted at least 8 of the massive beings, and his tactical training told him that fighting would be suicide even if they had brought heavier weapons. Kelly was transmitting everything back to Commander Sullivan on the ship, while also trying to detect patterns in the alien communications that might give them insight into what was being decided about their fate. The equipment showed that the creatures were using multiple forms of communication simultaneously, including sounds that humans could not hear, and electromagnetic signals that required sophisticated equipment to detect. Captain, I think we are witnessing some kind of formal challenge to Alpha's authority, Amy said as she watched Titan move closer to the creature they had first encountered. The body language and communication patterns suggest that Titan is questioning Alpha's right to make decisions about contact with us. Lisa realized that the humans had accidentally triggered a political situation within the alien society and that their survival might depend on the outcome of this debate between Alpha and Titan. The other creatures were clearly waiting to see how the leadership dispute would be resolved before deciding their own response to the human presence. Titan suddenly broke off its conversation with Alpha and turned its attention directly to the humans with an intensity that made Lisa feel as if she was being examined by a judge who was trying to decide whether she deserved to live or die. The massive creature approached slowly and deliberately, while the other beings watched in silence to see what would happen next. When Titan reached the edge of the human camp, it stopped and began producing a series of sounds and light patterns that were clearly directed at Lisa as the apparent leader of the human group. Amy's equipment showed that the communication was becoming more structured and formal, as if the creature was following some kind of protocol for evaluating foreign visitors. Captain, I think it wants to test us somehow, Kelly reported as she analyzed the patterns in Titan's signals. The communications are showing repeated sequences that might be some kind of challenge or invitation to prove ourselves worthy of continued contact. Lisa understood that this moment would determine not only the fate of her crew, but possibly the future relationship between humanity and this intelligent alien species. The wrong response could result in their deaths, while the right response might open the door to friendship and cooperation between two very different forms of life. Titan moved closer until it was standing directly in front of Lisa, with its massive head lowering to examine her more closely. She could see her own reflection in its large eyes, and she realized that this creature was trying to determine what kind of being she was, and whether humans represented something worthy of respect or something that needed to be destroyed. The other creatures maintained their positions around the clearing, but Lisa could sense that they were all focused on this interaction between their leader and the small alien who claimed to represent an entire species from another world. Alpha remained nearby, but it was clear that Titan had assumed control of the situation and would make the final decision about what happened next. Tony moved to position himself between his captain and the massive alien, but Lisa held up her hand to stop him because she understood that this was not a situation that could be resolved through military action. The creature was testing her personally, and any sign of aggression or fear would likely result in the immediate termination of all contact between their species. Titan began producing new patterns of sound and light that Amy's equipment translated as questions about human nature and capabilities. The creature wanted to understand what these small beings were capable of and whether they represented a threat or an opportunity for its people. Lisa realized that her response to this interrogation would echo through history as either the moment when humanity gained a powerful ally or the moment when first contact ended in tragedy. Titan positioned itself directly in front of Captain Lisa Martinez and began what could only be described as a formal examination of her capabilities and character. The massive creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted to configurations that Dr. Amy Foster's equipment identified as indicating a structured testing protocol that appeared to be standard procedure for evaluating foreign visitors to their territory. Lisa stood perfectly still as Titan lowered its enormous head to study her more closely while the other creatures maintained their positions around the clearing like judges, waiting to see the results of an important trial. She could feel the alien's breath, which was warm, and carried scents that reminded her of earth forests, mixed with something metallic that might have been related to the creature's natural electrical systems. The first test came when Titan used one of its smaller appendages to point toward a collection of objects that it had arranged on the ground between them. Lisa looked down and saw stones of different sizes and shapes, along with pieces of wood and what appeared to be crystalline formations that might have been naturally occurring minerals from somewhere else on the planet. Amy was recording everything, while trying to understand the significance of the objects that Titan had selected for this examination. The patterns in the creature's bioluminescent displays suggested that this was a test of cognitive ability rather than physical strength, which made sense given the obvious size difference between humans and these massive beings. Titan began rearranging the objects in complex patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles that Lisa recognized from her engineering background. The creature was demonstrating concepts related to geometric relationships and spatial reasoning, while watching carefully to see if the human could understand and respond appropriately to the intellectual challenge being presented. Lisa studied the arrangements for several minutes before beginning to create her own patterns using the available materials. She started with simple geometric shapes and progressively moved to more complex configurations that demonstrated her understanding of the mathematical concepts that Titan had introduced. The massive creature watched her work with what appeared to be growing interest and approval. Sergeant Tony Blake remained ready to defend his captain, but he could see that this interaction was not about physical combat, but rather about demonstrating human intelligence and problem-solving abilities to beings who clearly valued mental capabilities above brute force. Kelly Moore was transmitting everything back to Commander Jake Sullivan while monitoring the communication frequencies for any changes in the aliens' behavior patterns. The second test involved what appeared to be a three-dimensional puzzle that Titan constructed using interlocking pieces of crystalline material that fit together in ways that defied obvious logic. Lisa approached the puzzle methodically by examining each piece individually before attempting to understand how they might work together as a complete structure. Amy provided assistance by using her scanners to analyze the crystalline materials and determine their properties, which helped Lisa understand how the pieces were designed to interact with each other. The solution required thinking in 4 dimensions rather than the 3 that humans normally used for spatial reasoning. But Lisa's training in advanced mathematics allowed her to visualize the relationships between the components. When she successfully completed the puzzle, Titan's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what the monitoring equipment identified as expressions of surprise and satisfaction. The massive creature had clearly not expected the small human to solve a challenge that was designed for beings with much larger brains and different cognitive processes. The third test was more complex and involved what appeared to be a simulation of resource management using natural materials to represent different elements of a planetary ecosystem. Titan created a miniature environment using soil, water, plants, and small representations of various life forms, while indicating through gestures that Lisa needed to demonstrate how she would maintain balance and sustainability within the system. This challenge drew on Lisa's experience as a space explorer who had dealt with closed ecosystem management aboard spacecraft during long voyages between star systems. She began by analyzing the relationships between the different components and then made careful adjustments to optimize the flow of resources while maintaining the health of all the represented life forms. The test took almost an hour to complete. But when Lisa finished her work, Titan examined the results carefully before producing patterns of light and sound that Amy's equipment translated as expressions of deep approval and respect. The creature had presented challenges that were designed to evaluate wisdom and long-term thinking, rather than just immediate problem-solving ability. But the final test was different from all the others and seemed to be the most important part of the entire examination process. Titan placed 2 objects in front of Lisa with deliberate ceremony while the other creatures moved closer to observe her choice. The first object was a sharp piece of stone that had been carefully shaped into an effective cutting tool or weapon, while the second was a piece of fruit from one of the local trees that was clearly edible and nutritious. Amy realized immediately that this was not about the practical uses of the objects, but rather about the symbolic meaning of the choice that Lisa would make. The weapon represented the path of violence and domination, while the fruit represented the path of cooperation and mutual benefit. The decision would indicate to the alien observers what kind of species humanity represented and what their intentions might be regarding future interactions. Lisa looked at both objects while considering not just her immediate situation, but the long-term implications of her choice for the relationship between humans and these intelligent beings. She could see that Titan and the other creatures were watching her every movement and expression as they waited to learn something fundamental about human nature and values. Tony was tense because his training told him that weapons were tools for survival and that choosing the stone might be the practical decision for someone in a potentially dangerous situation. But Lisa understood that this moment was about more than personal survival, and that her choice would be interpreted as a statement about humanity's approach to dealing with other intelligent species. Kelly was monitoring the aliens' communication frequencies and could detect increasing intensity in their exchanges as they waited for Lisa to make her decision. The bioluminescent patterns of all the creatures were synchronizing in ways that suggested they were sharing information and opinions about what the human's choice might reveal about her species. Amy was recording everything while also analyzing the subtle changes in the aliens' behavior that might provide clues about the significance of this test within their culture. The equipment showed that the creature's electromagnetic signatures were shifting in patterns that suggested heightened emotional involvement in the outcome of this final challenge. Lisa reached toward the objects knowing that her choice would define the future relationship between humanity and the first intelligent alien species they had encountered among the stars. The dying creature dragged Amanda deeper into the ocean with its remaining strength. Its massive tentacles wrapped around her body while toxic blood poured from the wounds she had inflicted. But Amanda had prepared for this final, desperate attack, and she was ready to turn the monster's last gambit against it. As they descended toward the ocean floor, Amanda activated the emergency air supply built into her research suit. She had modified it during her preparations to provide not just oxygen, but also a concentrated dose of stimulants that would keep her conscious and alert, even under extreme pressure. The creature expected her to pass out from the depth and pressure, but instead she remained fully awake and aware. More importantly, Amanda had studied the underwater terrain around the island, and she knew exactly where the creature was taking her. The deepest trench near the island was also the location of the most active underwater volcanic vents. The monster was unknowingly dragging both of them directly into a natural furnace. Amanda could feel the water temperature rising as they approached the thermal vents. The creature's grip on her was weakening as its injuries took their toll, and the toxic minerals in the heated water continued to damage its bioelectric organs. This was her chance to escape, but Amanda had a better idea than just getting away. She waited until they were directly above the largest volcanic vent, and then she activated her final weapon. Amanda had converted her emergency medical kit into a chemical bomb using the concentrated acids and bases from her laboratory supplies. When the chemicals mixed, they would create an explosive reaction hot enough to trigger a volcanic eruption. The explosion ripped through the water and immediately triggered a massive release of superheated gas and molten rock from the ocean floor. The volcanic vent erupted with tremendous force, sending a column of boiling water and toxic steam shooting toward the surface. The creature was caught directly in the path of the eruption. Amanda used the explosion's shock wave to break free from the monster's weakened grip. She swam frantically toward the surface, while behind her the creature was being cooked alive by the volcanic eruption she had triggered. The legendary void kraken that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years was finally meeting its end in the fires of an alien volcano. She reached the surface just as the underwater eruption sent massive waves across the ocean. Amanda rode the waves back toward the island while watching the water around the volcanic vent turn red with the creature's blood. The monster's massive body floated to the surface piece by piece as the eruption continued to tear it apart. Amanda dragged herself onto the beach exhausted but alive. Behind her, the ocean was still churning with volcanic activity, and the remains of the galaxy's most feared predator. She had done something no other being in known space had ever accomplished. She had killed the void kraken in single combat. But Amanda Cross was nothing if not practical. She was still stranded on an alien planet with limited supplies and no way to contact rescue ships. The dead monster floating in the ocean represented a massive source of food and materials that could keep her alive for months while she worked on repairing her communication equipment. Amanda spent the next 3 days harvesting useful parts from the creature's carcass as it washed up on the beach in pieces. The monster's hide was incredibly tough and made excellent shelter material. Its bioelectric organs still held enough charge to power her equipment. Most importantly, its meat was surprisingly edible after being cooked by the volcanic eruption. She set up a processing station on the beach and began systematically butchering the alien predator. Amanda had field-dressed large animals during her research expeditions on Earth, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of processing a 40-foot alien monster. Every part of the creature was useful for something. The tentacles provided enough protein to feed her for weeks. The bioelectric organs could power her equipment indefinitely. The creature's blood contained minerals that could be used to create tools and weapons. Even its bones were hollow and filled with a lightweight material perfect for construction projects. Amanda built a much better shelter using the monster's hide and bones. She created a workshop area where she could continue her research while also preparing the creature's meat for long-term storage. The irony was not lost on her that the galaxy's apex predator had become her food supply and construction materials. On the 7th day after the battle, Amanda finally managed to repair her long-range communication equipment using components from the creature's bioelectric organs. Her first successful transmission was answered immediately by a Zephyrian patrol ship that had been searching the area for survivors from her research vessel. Commander Zethkar himself led the rescue mission. When his ship entered orbit around the planet, he expected to find only Amanda's remains, if anything at all. No being in recorded galactic history had ever survived an encounter with the legendary Void Kraken. The monster's reputation for killing everything it encountered was well established across dozens of star systems. Instead, the rescue team found Amanda sitting comfortably in a shelter made from kraken hide while cooking steaks cut from the creature's tentacles over an open fire. She greeted them casually and offered to share her meal as if entertaining guests for a backyard barbecue rather than being rescued from certain death. The Zephyrian soldiers could not believe what they were seeing. The beach was covered with organized piles of processed kraken parts. Amanda had turned the entire shoreline into a butcher shop and meat processing facility. She had not just survived an encounter with the galaxy's most deadly predator, she had turned it into her dinner. Commander Zethkar walked among the remains trying to comprehend what had happened. The evidence was overwhelming, but almost impossible to accept. A single human had killed the Void Kraken using nothing but primitive tools and basic scientific knowledge. It changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity. Amanda packed up her samples and research notes while the rescue team continued staring at the processed monster parts. She had collected enough data during her week on the planet to revolutionize xenobiology research. The Kraken's anatomy and bioelectric systems would provide insights into alien evolution that could advance science by decades. More importantly, Amanda had enough preserved Kraken meat to feed herself for months, and enough hide and bone materials to build a small house. She was not just surviving her ordeal, she was profiting from it. The galaxy's most feared predator had become her personal food supply and resource stockpile. As the Zephyrian ship prepared to leave orbit, Amanda took one last look at the island, where she had fought and won the most important battle of her life. She had arrived as a stranded scientist and was leaving as the first being to ever defeat the legendary Void Kraken. But more than that, she had established humanity's reputation as something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Word of Amanda's victory spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, every spacefaring civilization knew that a human had killed the Void Kraken and turned it into dinner. The story became legend almost immediately and changed how every alien species viewed humanity. Humans were no longer seen as weak primitives from a backwater planet. They were recognized as apex predators, capable of defeating any threat through intelligence, adaptability, and the terrifying human ability to turn any situation to their advantage. Amanda Cross had single-handedly established her species as the galaxy's new dominant force. She returned to Earth as a hero, but Amanda knew the real victory was not in killing the monster. The real victory was in proving that humans could adapt and overcome any challenge the universe could throw at them. They were no longer just another species struggling to survive among the stars. They were the new apex predators, and the galaxy would never be the same.